Claire Donovan was the beloved teacher every parent trusted until detectives discovered her shocking accusation against 11-year-old Adam might have been a calculated lie that nearly destroyed his life. The quiet town of Mapleford had always been the kind of place where everyone seemed to know each other as routines. Neighbors waved from their driveways, children rode bikes along safe streets, and trust was something that people rarely questioned. Among the familiar faces was Ms. Claire Donovan, an elementary school teacher known for her gentle manner and her dedication to her students. Parents often spoke of how lucky they were to have her teaching in their district. She had even taken it upon herself to organize after-school play dates at her home, a place where children could work on homework together, play games, and enjoy snacks until their parents finished work. These gatherings had been running for over a year without incident, and many parents saw them as a blessing. That sense of safety began to crack on a chilly afternoon in early spring. Without warning, Ms. Donovan contacted the local police department with a disturbing complaint. She alleged that one of the children who regularly attended her play dates, an 11-year-old boy named Adam, had been involved in sexual behavior during the visits. She claimed the incidents had taken place on multiple occasions and had caused her serious concern. The accusation was shocking, not only because of its nature, but because of the age of the child involved. In a community that prided itself on protecting its young, the idea that such a thing could happen under the roof of a trusted teacher was almost unthinkable. Word of the complaint spread quickly among the parents. Some were immediately outraged at the thought of a child behaving in such a way. Others were quietly skeptical, struggling to believe that a boy like Adam, known for being quiet, reserved, and deeply interested in building model airplanes, could be involved in anything of that sort. Adam's parents, blindsided by the accusation, insisted that their son had never done anything inappropriate. They described him as a gentle child who preferred books to roughhousing and often avoided situations that made him uncomfortable. When detectives received the complaint, they understood it had to be handled with extreme care. Any case involving a child required a delicate approach, and this one involved not only a minor but also a respected educator. They began by listening to Ms. Donovan's account, which she delivered with an air of seriousness and authority. She spoke as though she were protecting the other children in her care, portraying herself as someone reluctantly forced to come forward with uncomfortable truths. But as she described the alleged events, small inconsistencies began to emerge. The times she mentioned did not line up neatly with the schedule of the play dates, and her descriptions of what she claimed to have seen shifted slightly as she repeated the story. Despite these early discrepancies, detectives could not dismiss the matter outright. If there was any chance her account was true, they needed to ensure the safety of all the children who attended the playdates. Quietly, they began reaching out to the parents of other children who had been there, seeking to understand whether anyone else had noticed troubling behavior. At this point, no one could have guessed how tangled the case would become or how drastically the story would shift once the deeper layers began to surface. Detectives began their work by speaking first with Adam's parents. They were cooperative but visibly shaken, their voices carrying the strain of sleepless nights. They explained that Adam had never been in any sort of trouble, at school or elsewhere. Teachers described him as polite, a little shy, and very focused on his hobbies. He preferred reading adventure stories, sketching animals, and tinkering with small machines. The idea that he could be involved in inappropriate behavior was completely foreign to them. Still, the detectives knew that in sensitive cases, they had to rely on evidence rather than personal impressions. They next reviewed the nature of the play dates themselves. Ms. Donovan's home had become a familiar place for several students in her class. The gatherings were informal but well attended, usually lasting a few hours after school. Children would sit at the kitchen table working on homework, play board games in the living room, or run in and out of the backyard. On rainy days, Ms. Donovan kept them indoors with puzzles and art projects. Parents saw these sessions as a safe environment, and no one had ever expressed concern until now. When detectives asked Ms. Donovan for specific details about her accusations, her responses raised more questions than answers. She would begin describing an incident and then pause to adjust the timeline, often contradicting her earlier statements. She mentioned dates that conflicted with school calendars and times when Adam's parents recalled him being elsewhere. She also seemed uncertain about whether any other children had witnessed the alleged behavior, at times implying that they had and at other times saying they had not. Hoping to gain a clearer picture, investigators spoke with several children who regularly attended the playdates. The conversations were approached gently, with trained specialists asking neutral, open-ended questions. Not a single child described seeing or experiencing anything unusual. Most spoke about board games, snacks, and the occasional squabble over whose turn it was. A few recalled Adam sitting by himself drawing while others played outside. The absence of any supporting accounts made the detectives cautious. While children sometimes stayed silent about uncomfortable topics, the consistency of their statements was difficult to ignore. The more the detectives compared Ms. Donovan's claims to the accounts of others, the more the puzzle pieces refused to fit together. They noticed she often emphasized her own role as a guardian figure, positioning herself as someone who had bravely taken on the responsibility of protecting her students. It was a tone they had heard before from people eager to shape the narrative in their favor. The lack of tangible evidence meant they could not simply close the case, but it was clear that they were dealing with more than a straightforward complaint. In the background, whispers began circulating among parents. Some were reluctant to question a teacher they had known for years, but others were starting to wonder if there was another explanation for her actions. For the investigators, it was becoming harder to ignore the possibility that the truth lay somewhere far from the story they had been told. The investigation took a sharper turn when detectives decided to dig deeper into Ms. Donovan's past. Her record at the school appeared mostly clean on the surface, filled with positive remarks about her teaching style and dedication to her students. Yet buried among the glowing evaluations was a formal reprimand from the previous year. It stated that she had been cautioned about hosting students in her home without another adult present, a violation of school policy meant to protect both children and staff from misunderstandings or potential harm. While the incident had not led to disciplinary action beyond a warning, it stood out as a moment when her judgment had been questioned. Detectives also began to look at her recent interactions with Adam's family. They found that only a month before the complaint was filed, Adam's father had submitted a grievance to the school board regarding Ms. Donovan's grading methods. The issue had prompted an internal review of her class records, a process that drew unwanted attention to her work. Though the school ultimately sided with her on most points, the experience had left her frustrated and defensive. Investigators noted the timing of her allegations against Adam with unease. It was difficult to ignore that her accusations came almost immediately after the school audit began. As they pieced together more background information, detectives uncovered additional patterns. Ms. Donovan had a history of conflicts with certain parents, often those who challenged her decisions or questioned her teaching style. Several former students' families had described her as overly controlling, with a tendency to react strongly when her authority was questioned. While none of these accounts suggested criminal behavior, they painted a picture of someone who valued control and might go to unusual lengths to maintain it. A turning point came when an anonymous tip reached the police station. The caller claimed that Ms. Donovan had, in the past, made false statements about a different child in order to discourage the parents from complaining about her. That accusation had never been formally investigated, but it mirrored the current situation in unsettling ways. Detectives now had to consider the possibility that Ms. Donovan was not acting out of concern for the children in her care, but out of a desire to punish those who crossed her. To explore this angle, investigators began reviewing her digital communications. They obtained text messages and emails sent to friends and colleagues in the weeks before the complaint. Among the casual updates and school-related chatter, they found a troubling pattern: repeated references to Adam's family, laced with irritation and hints that she intended to deal with them. The language was vague enough to avoid being explicit, but its tone suggested more than simple annoyance. The mounting evidence began to suggest a motive rooted in personal resentment rather than genuine concern. Detectives realized they were no longer just looking at the behavior of a child, they were uncovering a calculated move by an adult who held a position of trust. It was an unsettling shift, and it meant the investigation was about to enter far darker territory than anyone had expected. The investigation's turning point arrived when detectives decided to track down any physical evidence that could either support or dismantle Ms. Donovan's story. One of the first steps was canvassing the neighborhood where she lived, speaking with anyone who might have noticed the comings and goings of children during the alleged incidents. It was during this process that a neighbor, an older man who lived directly across the street, mentioned having security cameras installed for his own home. He wasn't sure if they captured much beyond his driveway, but he agreed to let the police review the footage. When the recordings were examined, the detectives quickly saw their value. The cameras had a clear view of Ms. Donovan's front yard, the sidewalk, and part of her porch. On several of the dates she had given as times when inappropriate behavior supposedly occurred, the footage showed Adam arriving and leaving along with multiple other children. At no point did it appear that he lingered inside alone or stayed after the others had gone. On some days, the children could be seen running around the yard together before being called inside for snacks, then re-emerging as a group shortly before pickup. The scenes painted a picture of ordinary, innocent playdates. Encouraged by this lead, detectives secured a search warrant for Ms. Donovan's home and workspace. It was during this search that they stumbled upon something that made their suspicions grow. In a locked desk drawer at her house, they found a folder containing handwritten notes. The pages were filled with observations about various parents in the community, lists of who had complained about her in the past, along with small personal details about them. Some notes contained what looked like strategies for making those parents appear unreliable or problematic in the eyes of others. One page, in particular, mentioned Adam's family by name, with a short line beneath it: "If they push again, I'll make sure they regret it." The discovery was chilling. While it didn't explicitly outline her plans, it suggested an intent to harm reputations if she felt threatened. Combined with the timing of the complaint, the notes made it increasingly difficult to believe her accusations had been motivated by genuine concern for child safety. Detectives continued to dig, this time focusing on her communications in the days surrounding the complaint. They uncovered a series of private messages to a colleague in which she expressed frustration about the school audit and hinted that certain families needed to be put in their place. The tone was dismissive, even mocking, toward the parents who had questioned her methods. As the evidence piled up, the case began to shift completely. No longer was the focus on proving whether a child had done something wrong. It was now about proving that a trusted adult had deliberately lied in order to damage a family's standing in the community. The investigation was moving toward its conclusion, and the truth that was emerging was far more unsettling than the accusation that had started it all. Detectives knew they had reached the point where the evidence needed to be presented to Ms. Donovan. They arranged an interview at the station, laying out the security footage, the handwritten notes, and the digital messages. From the start, her demeanor was tense. She maintained that her accusations were truthful, claiming the footage didn't capture everything and the notes were being misinterpreted. Yet, as the conversation progressed, her explanations grew inconsistent. She could not explain why the dates she had provided aligned perfectly with videos showing children together the entire time. She stumbled when asked about the specific line in her notes regarding Adam's family. The confident authority she had displayed early in the case began to slip away, replaced by short, guarded responses. While she did not outright confess, her inability to reconcile the evidence with her claims was enough for detectives to move forward. The prosecutor's office reviewed the case and agreed there was substantial proof that she had knowingly made a false report. Warrants were issued, and she was arrested on charges of filing false statements, child endangerment, and attempting to pervert the course of justice. The arrest shocked the town. For many, the idea that a respected teacher could deliberately target a child was deeply unsettling, especially one she had been trusted to mentor. The community's reaction was swift and divided. Some residents felt betrayed, questioning how someone in such a position could manipulate her authority in such a way. Others, still clinging to her earlier reputation, struggled to accept the truth. For Adam's family, the arrest brought both relief and lingering pain. Though the accusations were proven false, the months of suspicion had taken their toll. Friends had distanced themselves, whispers had followed them in public places, and Adam himself had withdrawn, wary of being around people outside his immediate family. The legal process moved forward steadily. In court, the prosecution laid out the timeline of events, showing how the complaint had been filed shortly after the school audit began. They presented the surveillance footage, the folder of notes, and the digital messages as a pattern of intent. The defense tried to frame the situation as a misunderstanding, arguing that Ms. Donovan had been overly cautious and had misinterpreted innocent behavior, but the paper trail and the contradictions in her statements proved difficult to overcome. Ultimately, Ms. Donovan was convicted and sentenced to serve time in prison. She lost her teaching license, and her name was permanently tied to the case. For the families who had once trusted her, the outcome served as a sobering reminder that authority did not always guarantee integrity. For detectives, it was a clear example of how thorough investigation and persistence could prevent lasting damage to an innocent person's life. In the aftermath, the school district implemented stricter policies for staff hosting students outside of school grounds. Parents became more cautious, more involved in understanding where their children spent their time. The scars from the case lingered in Mapleford, but so did the lesson that truth, while sometimes buried under layers of deceit, could still be uncovered with patience and determination.